Well, welcome to the Dream Labs. I am Dr. Contrast, and we are live. And Terrace, it's great to have you on board. I hope all is well with you. Just a neat thing to have you on board as usual. And I thought it'd be interesting today we talked some weeks ago about putting together some instructional programs, for example. And I just felt that after last week's presentation on getting some branding work done, we'll go right back to some basic things here. And I'm sure there's some pieces and parts that everybody's really familiar with, but I just thought I'd spend some time here today going through, the fundamentals of how to put together really solid organic shapes and really utilizing the whole principle of perspective, circles of perspective. It's not an ellipse. There's a lot of misnomer out there about in terms of, is it an ellipse, is it a circle? The ellipse is a mathematical approach, but the circle is more of a visual, aesthetic approach that we use in terms of developing shape, form, and surface. So I'm going to walk you through some basic things here today, and hopefully this will be the first of many little instructional things here to kind of go through. For those of us who need it, especially myself, I go through this all the time and practice it, and it's been really helpful. But my hope is that today, this conversation and this subject matter is not structural as much as it is instructional. There's some myths out there we need to kind of put together to rest, and also to kind of clarify what the mission is. And I think the basic fundamental theme here today in this presentation is a very simple line, that you can't debate the truth. And that's what we're going to try and establish here today with this whole idea of putting together what I refer to as a very complicated set of circumstances. So I'm going to walk you through some things, some of the process work, and then show you at the end some little, just a hands-on sketch running about how to set things up. So we'll go from there. So this publication I started here, this page was done some time ago for a book I put together on just basic rapid sketching and ideas and breaking down the fundamentals of all the components we work with to create subject matter in a very hopefully encapsulated point of view. Notice again that this side is a one-point perspective, and you get into things like getting into the real key to it all is off the face of a cube, and we'll get into that in a moment here. So the face of the cube becomes extremely powerful in terms of being the tool that we use to kind of create these organic shapes. So notice the facing plane, and putting in perspective, facing plane, and then going back and drive in perspective, and how everything falls in place nicely once we understand what the majors and minors and axles are doing. So that's going to be part of the process today. But these are just a group of sketches that were done. For example, notice how the axis is always vertical, always vertical, always vertical, vertical, and so forth. And then here, horizontal. This is a little bit of a two-point study here, as is this. But then we go from one point in the two-point perspective, and then all of a sudden, all you've done is just shifted the view a little bit to take into account the perspective drama of getting into a two-point perspective. So in a case like that, notice, same setup. You got a leading edge, you've got the facing plane, the actual facing edge, or face of the actual circle or cube, then walking back in space, one up on top and two on the side. And again, just some very various little sketches on how to put that process together. So we go to page 2 here. It's examples of how that begins to function. I'm looking at, for example, a one-point perspective, and I think the most important thing to develop out of this, or to get out of this, is that there are three basic things that we need to really fully understand in putting together circles of perspective and developing those shapes or compound form, whether it's product architecture, interior space, transportation design. There are three basic fundamental truths you cannot violate. Number one, that the major axis is always going to be vertical. Always vertical. And I'll show you that. I mean, in some cases, I take that back. Vertical, in many cases, in two-point perspective, but very much horizontal, for example, laying back in space when you go to one-point perspective, as you see it here in these examples. There's also a minor axis, which runs at 9 degrees to the major. And then again, that center point right there, we haven't talked about it here, but we'll get into a little bit later, and that is called that's an axle. There's three certain things. They're really all function together. Now, the major axis, I'll review this throughout the course of the whole presentation today. The major axis does the following. Major axis sets up the orientation. It's standing upright. That's the orientation. Or laying down in the case of one-point perspective. Number two, the minor axis gives you direction. That tells you which way you're headed, vanishing point right or vanishing point left. So it's again, major, orientation, minor, direction, and the axle, which we're not showing you here yet, but we'll show you a little bit later on, is rotation. How you spin something around that axle, whether the circle goes larger or smaller, there's always an axle there to kind of guide you through the process to get that done. So, and Terrace, if you're still with me, making sense so far. I really appreciate your input here. And this is not going to be a case of, I don't want to cause any trepidation or difficulty. I'm going to keep it nice and simple, get down to the point of essence of some of the language structure to make sure that we understand all these things correctly, then begin to put the pieces together in time to come. And while I'm at it too, I'm waiting for a response if you're there, Terrace. Major, yep, you got it. Major orientation, minor direction, and again, the axle gets into rotation. It just really makes a lot of sense. And I think the thing I'm getting at here, a lot of young people I'm working with, for example, and doing consulting work, they start to see this, oh, I want to create my ellipsis. Well, that's a lie. Ellipsis, 4 mathematical sweeps, equal. But a circle changes direction as you go into it, and you'll see as we move it into space here. So here again, some examples, pardon me, of the 1 point. There's the face of the cube. Now, when you lay it down, notice that major axis is still here. That's major. That goes back to vanishing point, central vanishing point. In a case like this, a 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, look how it goes right, that minor axis goes right back into vanishing point right in this case. And again, another 1 point perspective and another 1 point perspective. Look at how this, again, that's the major axis is right here. This becomes your major axis. That becomes your minor axis. Minor axis is always running parallel to our eyes, and the major goes back to vanishing point, whether it's on the right-hand side or the left-hand side, back to your central vanishing point. Last but not least, back to a 2 point cube, face of a cube. Again, notice, again, vertical, major, minor right on horizon line, and then again, you rotate out of that, and we'll show you in a moment here from sketch running demonstration about how to rotate those circles to make them nice and smooth and consistent in the picture plane. A lot of it depends on shoulder motion, obviously, and I think the thing I'm really going to get into here later on is it gets into that whole idea of when you rotate that circle, to go counterclockwise. You see it, begin to strike it. So there's a quick little page here on just the fundamentals of 1 and 2 point perspective, how, again, cannot stress enough, it all comes off the face of a cube. It's not an ellipse, it's a cube, 4 by 4, equal sides. And you have that whole setup on a major, minor, and then you go from there. So that's the second page we're looking at here. Now, I just went through a little series of thumbnail sketches here, a variety of 2 point studies here to show you how that begins to set up. Notice again, we're looking at the major axis, the minor axis, and then the circle in place. And again, on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side. So begin to look at that whole idea. And these points right here are called contact points. And there's a reference for them to look at when you begin to see these forms come together. Again, cylinder, top to bottom. Again, notice major axis. Then you've got the minor. In this case, minors are going right back to vanishing point right. Makes a huge amount of sense. Again, notice here's a 1 point perspective. Notice how that minor axis or major axis is running vertically in this case because it's a cylinder. If I lay it down on a plane, for example, if I just isolate that plane right there down below, then that major axis goes right back to central vanishing point, as does this one, central vanishing point. But the major axis goes right back to VP, and then horizontal, minor, horizontal, minor. Again, another case here, putting a cylinder together, 2 point perspective, major axis, minor axis. Then this is my drive line or axis line right here. I'm going to rotate something around that, and I'll show you in a few moments how that begins to function. So that's a page for little thumbnail studies here. And then we go back into this guy, and we go another page here, getting into more compound forms, for example, really kind of sliding the shapes around just a bit here. Again, same process. A very inclined cylinder, for example. Notice, again, same process. You plant the base, get the face down in perspective, then begin to set it all up. And again, major axis, minor axis, major axis, minor axis, and again that axle runs right through the center line of that piece. That inclines it, so that's how it goes. This is a good case of getting into a taper, for example. Same process, setting it all up with a circle. Then you come back into here, and you begin to look at, for example, notice you shrink this down. Well, the best way to do that is to come back and cross-reference with that backside plane, come back and pick a point of reference, set those points up, and then begin to use that as a tool to get that whole circle to work. So that's the idea here. Again, major, minor rather, major, minor, major. A truncated cone, same process again. This is a 1 point perspective. Notice how, again, major axis back to VP, and again, horizontal, minor axis. 2 point perspective. Here's a good example here of where the axle comes into play. Here is the major axis, here's the major axis, here's the minor axis, and let me do this for a moment here. Let's take that point right there, that line right there. Now it comes through it all. That becomes the 3rd point, which is now the axle. And I'm going to rotate that guy as we go here. Oh, question here. it made total sense what you said the last time we spoke about this topic. If the circle is standing up vertically, the contact point should be vertically aligned as well. That's correct. If it's upright, then those verticals should all be lining up properly here. So it's pretty neat how to put it all together here. And Terrace, great question, and thank you very much. So again, so if the circle is standing up vertically, the contact point should be vertically aligned as well, vertically and horizontally on the contact points. And we'll show you that in a moment here. That's the study here. Now, I'm going to switch gears for a minute here, getting into more compound forms. This was done some time ago for a publication I put together in transportation design. And I know it sounds like a pretty favored concept to work with, but it's a very complicated set of circumstances. But I use this as a point here, as a reference, getting into horizon line up on top. And I showed this, I brought this out to just kind of just show you how really complicated this stuff can become. But it eliminates complication when you understand what the geometry does. And we're looking at here again, here's my leading edge, this is where I'm starting. Here's my first face of a cube. And I count back 1, 2, 3, 4 faces back. Here's my rear wheel, for example, in essence. And here's my front wheel. Far side, notice it opens up a bit and then opens up. This face and that face become equal. We're almost in the same plane. As you move to the left, for example, and this cube right here, the face of this cube, if this is 45 degrees, this one goes back to 35 degrees. It'll open up and shrink down to by 10 degrees. And by the same token, if I start here, pardon me, I take that back. If this is at 45 degrees, this will open up and go larger 55 degrees because you're moving away from your station point. So you'll see that getting a little bit larger. As you start back here, if this is 45 degrees and you go back in space, that'll reduce by 10. So it'll go from 45 back to 35. It begins to diminish. And I brought that in, I brought these sketches in for a very simple reason. That when I look at certain sketches, for example, especially student work, a lot of times I see the same thing happening, even professional work. So that circle up front is the same dimension back here. That can't happen. That's almost like an elevation twist. As it goes back in space, it reduces. As it opens up in space, it increases. So that's why this gets larger, smaller, because it's moving away from you. So let's hope that sets up. That's a basic geometry here. And what I did up on top is give you an overall height, for example, of how to begin to build that form or shape into a transportation system. So that was the first one we did here, which really looked like this. Then let's go back to the second page here. This opened up a little bit more in terms of getting some more dramatic perspective, but the same principle applies. Notice, this is the anatomy of success when you're dealing with a very difficult subject matter like transportation design. It can be really overwhelming, but again, the task here today is to discuss about what happens when you put the truth into action. And the truth is, all circles, no matter what size, shape, or whatever we deal with, all of them deal with one simple, very basic, fundamental truth. It's built off the face of a cube. Number two, the Constitution is made up of 3 lines. Number 1, it's the vertical, which is the major, horizontal, which is the minor, and the axial, which goes right back to the vanishing point, right or left, depending on your orientation or the sketches you're working with here. So here's another example, for example. Here's the leading edge, for example. Right here is the leading edge. There's my first circle. As it goes away from me, if this is 45 degrees, this goes to 55 degrees. It increases. It opens up a little. You can see it here, look how much larger that looks. It's just a little bit touch. As you go back in space, look how it diminishes. In the far side wheel, for example, this one and this one are almost on the same plane, so they'll remain equal. So it's 45, 45, 55, 35. It just reduces. And here's a point we're getting at here. A little thumbnail sketch up on top. Same principle, or no matter when you change the view, same principle. Again, notice it really begins to show up here in terms of how we get that put together and what the pieces are beginning to do in the overall process of developing a very complicated thing like transportation design. And I can say this too, at this stage of the game, got a bit of a break. This whole theorem or this concept of fact works no matter what you're dealing with, whether it's architecture, product design, anything else you're dealing with. These fundamental truths cannot be violated. And that's why I thought I'd kind of pull back a little bit and do a little bit of, hopefully, an instructional piece, not a structural thing to actually and just overwhelm us, but to really simplify the form down into the essence and begin to put it into practice as we go down the line here. So that's another thumbnail study. Now, again, another little page of references here. Now you just have to put, like, for example, contour in. How to begin that little section right there, it tells me what that center line is going to look like, basically the contour of the automobile. But again, notice how, again, Larger, smaller, open, same size. Same thing with here. Notice, let me pickup truck. This is a little bit of the cab area here, for example. Same process, larger, starting original, a little bit larger, opens up, and again, going back in space, a little bit smaller. Very quick thumbnail study here, but the geometry, for example, honoring principle of dynamic perspective. On the center line, for example, that's another key to work with here. We'll show you that a little bit later here, too. Let's see, Vanteros, sorry, it really does convey such a sense of reality, getting the relative degrees of the. Yeah, that's a great point, Vanteros. I'm sorry I didn't bring that up too. That's the idea of being to create reality. It's believable. How many times have you and I looked at sketches, for example, and you see these circles that are just totally distorted because they're being guessed at? And I think that's a dangerous phenomenon in this business, for example. I'd rather know where I am as opposed to guessing where I'm going. These facts that we're working with here today illustrate the truth. You can't debate that. It's geometry. It's part of the mathematical formula. Even though it's a visual business, it's a mathematical setup or foundation that helps to provide it for us. So I think getting the idea of the geometry of the conversation, of the language down, begins to perpetuate itself into good, successful sketches. You can't help but really create things that are really unique and novel and correct and visually accurate without the understanding of what the truth does. And I think a lot of kind of young people getting into transportation design just start to guess at this stuff. And I'll show you an example later on what's going on in some academic exercises that is really disturbing. And I'm not stating that to make a controversial comment. It's just very alarming to see that not a lot of things are being held properly or told properly or projected properly into young people to kind of practice their skills, and it's costing them at the end of the line when they put together a portfolio for review purposes for employment. So there we are. Again, basic setup. I just want to really hammer home the idea about this whole idea about distance and what happens to when you start with that leading edge, which is right here. When you start with that leading edge, as you go back in space, it's going to open up. As you go back in space, it's going to shrink or get smaller, and that becomes evidently truthful. So powerful, it's not even funny. It's just a really great fact to work with. And by the way, too, I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Over the course of time, I have been so blessed and fortunate to work with people that really understood their craft. Sid Mead, for example, brilliant, gifted individual, absolute genius visually. And Homer Agassi, all these individuals I worked with over the years had this whole concept laid down and really practiced into us and just over again. Repeat. It became part of the fabric of our conversation. So there's another example. Now putting in the practical language here. Now notice how you start to put together the geometry. Now this sketch takes it a little bit further, showing us again, once you have the structure down, that structure or that base, for example, starts to really help in terms of putting together compounds. For example, here's the basic body swell line here, falling into place with the body, upper bone line, contour line down below at the rocker series. And again, notice up that edge of that face of the cube, dropping off into the front end graphic. Just a very simple form here to deal with. And a little bit later on, I'll show you, for example, by sketch, how to create that round for organic shape. I've seen over and over again, I'm sure you might have too, Anteros, and some of these principles. You start to see this, for example, if it's not done well, you see this headlamp, and then we'll try to force seeing the other headlamp. Sometimes the perspective is so powerful that what happens is you see this lamp or that graphic, but it disappears because of the roundness. It disappears visually. Again, I'll try and convey that in just a few moments here from one sketch to another. So that's really interesting how, again, the dynamics of space is really powerful because it begins to take distortion and make it reality. Isn't that odd? The distortion of getting shape down and using the geometry of math, or in this case, the face of a cube, really begins to create reality. But it also, distortion becomes believable. The more you distort it, the more believable it becomes. You get to a place where it's violating the ethics, obviously. But for the most part, that's what it does. It just really kind of underscores what begins to happen when you put geometry in the right proper action, convey the truth, develop accurate sketches. That's the triad we're working with. Know the truth, develop the truth, and create the truth. That's just that simple. So it's very cool. There's another little study here, a little bit more of an overhead perspective. Again, notice how, again, leading edge here, back in space, about the same size, almost like a 1 point perspective. And then again, notice it's a little bit smaller, and again, that becomes almost equal. So the orientation. So that kind of concludes that portion of it here. So I put some pieces together here just in sketch format to show you. I'm going to show you in one point perspective how this whole thing begins to work itself through here. So I'm going to switch gears and go to pen. First thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to find the perspective center of each one of these faces. For example, a face of cubes in a one point perspective. I'm going to come back here and create that diagonal, get that to run through. And again, pardon me for rotating the pad here just a bit, and get that to run through. And get those down. That begins to tell me, all that does is tell me where the perspective center of the face is. That's all it does for me. Now, in the process of putting the circle together, it's always interesting. Let's lay in there, for example, I'll go back to blue pen. Let's lay in where the minor axis is. This is now my minor axis. Let's put an MI next to it, and then this is my major, MA. Vertical, horizontal. Simple. That's where we are, right there. So now, once we have that, these become interesting points. So that point, that, and that. Those 4 points of reference are what we're going to use to develop the circle, and really, in counterclockwise motion, they become contact points. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to do the following here. I'm going to come back in, see it, strike it. There you are. There's one. Let's come back in again. Notice again, the whole idea, at the shoulder, from the shoulder, rotate counterclockwise into the actual object itself. There it is. I'm focusing on hitting that point, that point, that point, and that point. Those 4 contact points are critical. Same process here. Let's find the perspective center. Draw that through. Pardon me again as I rotate the pad. And rotate that point through. Pardon me again. There's my perspective center. And again, here's my minor axis. And for all intents and purposes, here's my major axis. Now that's going back to my vanishing point. Now once I've got that set up, again, same point. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are my contact points. Now this gets a little tricky. It's going to look distorted, but it's actually correct. So if I rotate here, now it does this. And there it is, in place. Counterclockwise, rotating into it, and then you've got it down to a science. And again, notice from the shoulder, not the wrist, but the shoulder. Very freewheeling. Again, one more time, all the way through, making certain we hit that, and that. Those 4 contact points. Let me stop there for a moment. Am I clarifying this pretty well? You think, Terrace? So far, so good? Excuse me. Pretty interesting conversation. I mean, it's a very difficult set of circumstances, but again, I want to be very careful to really clarify the need to understand what the language does. And once the language is understood, you put that into practice, and it just really gets into the whole idea of going sense of reality. Hey, very good. Thanks, Terrace. Much appreciated here. So one last little example here. Again, 1 point perspective. Let's find the perspective center. Find it. Draw through it. Draw through it. Here's my perspective center. And for all intents and purposes, here's now my minor axis. This is now my major axis. Going back to VP. Once I have those points set up, now it's this. I come back in, contact, 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 contact. Now I'm going to rotate. And there you are. Certain ways to kind of put that all together. I should practice drawing freehand circles more. No. And listen, you don't have to be rusty. The more you practice it, the better it's going to become. But I think that's our whole idea is as long as you practice from the shoulder, you're going to be fine. And it's really interesting. It's really, especially in your business, I'm sure with gaming, for example, you get into a lot of compound forms. So hopefully this will be a good helpful. So you know this already, but to just clarify it and resound on it would be a very good, hopefully helpful for you. So there it is in 1 point perspective. I'll come back to those in just a few moments by review. So here we are. Here it is here. Going back into this. That's in 1 point. Now we're going to go to 2 point. I'm going to stop here for a moment and show you what you don't do. And I'm going to use this face right here. Here's what's being taught. And I hope I am not being critical here. I'm not being judgmental. I'm just being observed. I'm observing this as being part of the truth that's being told out there, and it's absolutely devastating. So now it goes like this. You come back in, we're told here, fine, use that line, and then we'll use that line. And we're telling us here is that the longer line here, oh, pardon me just a moment, it's back to orientation, that the longer line here, one or the other, that becomes your major axis. And this becomes your minor axis. Now, when I look at that and I think, I see this all the time. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with that as well, then, Terrace. When you see that, then they're telling you, for example, off the major axis, on that angle, the longer line, generate your circle or ellipse. So it looks like this. Now notice, does that look right to you? That's what's being told. Yeah, the other building blocks of believability. That's a great point. And again, that's the reason for this subject matter here today, to kind of reinforce the absolute necessity for all of us, especially in your craft and my craft. We convey a sketch to a client that we're accurate and believable, and we're not being accused of distorting the reality or the factual truth of what happens in a case like this in organic forms. But let's go back to the sketch room. Look at this, analyze this. Look where that contact point is. There's one there, one here, and one here. Now that totally twists the whole process, especially when you put this into play. Let's go back to follow that drive line here. Let's go put that axle in line. That axle now comes through. This is now my axle. That tells me, oh, that's the way that thing's going to spin. I don't know if that's going to be right or not. I think it's absolutely false. Because again, notice it. When you go up there and look at your car today, for example, those of you who are listening later on, go out and look at your automobile from a 3/4 front. Tell me if you don't see those tires standing up like this. This is the base of the cube again, and here are contact points we need to really honor. It's that one, that one, that one, and that one. But yet in this example above, they're over here. They're counterproductive one to another. Really distorts the entire whole process. So let's take a look at now. Let's look at a comparison here. If I come back in and I find the perspective center of this guy, let's do this. There's A, and let me again rotate here. B. Well, I've got it here. Let's do it all at the same time. Find the perspective center. Find the perspective center. Find the perspective center. And again, find the perspective center. There I am. So it's here, it's there, and it's there. Now, in a case like that, notice, now that I've got that set up, let's take a look at one and the other here. Let's go back and get the major in place. This now becomes my, I'm going to switch gears here. Here's my major axis. Here's my minor axis, going back to VP. Here's my contact point, there, 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 and there. Turn it, rotate from the shoulder, counterclockwise, circle. What looks more believable, that or that? There's absolutely no contest whatsoever. One is absolutely correct, the other one is completely deceived and distorted because it's not truthful. Let's go back to this guy. Major axis, let's go back to here. Minor axis running through. Major axis running through. Minor, or pardon me, major going vertical. Again, contact point, contact, contact, contact. Rotate it. Circle. Look at the difference. Standing upright. Standing completely upright. Now, even with this, now let's go back here. Minor axis, running horizontal. Major axis, running vertical. Back to here. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are my contact points. When I come back into place here, look at this. Practice, practice. There it is. Look at the difference. These are very light sketches, I realize that, but I didn't want to get into a lot of situations or complications about getting into a lot of things that might really conflict us. This is completely false because it relies on, I hear this all the time in academia, always go to the longest line and create that circle or ellipse around that. Two false statements. Number one, the longest line, that's false. Number two, create your ellipse. It's not an ellipse, it's a circle in perspective. That's what these guys begin to follow here. Again, basic building block, face of a cube, face of a cube, face, face. There it is. And when you go back to that whole idea of major, minor, you've got it. Pardon me just for a moment here. Let's do this. If I come back out of this, no, I'll wait here for a little bit here. Boy, pardon me. So I think that really kind of encapsulates, for example, what happens. Look at both these examples, how they actually share one with another, majors and minors. And then the actual rotation, for example, it's always good to go counterclockwise. And if you're right-handed or left-handed, obviously go clockwise. It just reverses it because it keeps the shoulder nice and animated, and it becomes very much part of the process here. So there we are. That's 1 point. Here's a 2-point series. So I think, again, I'm amazed over the course of time, over the course of my career, when I go through public speaking engagements or workshops or clinics where I start to see this all the time. And furthermore, what really disturbs me more than that is that I'm reviewing a lot of portfolios for corporate people here across the country and here locally. And I look at portfolios and I see this all the time. And my question is, who taught you this or who lied to you? Because it's really not the fact. And these people are devastated. They didn't know this and they were not told that. Now, hopefully it's getting better. And again, my task today is not to criticize, but to open up and just evaluate, for example, and by observation. This is what I'm seeing instead of this, this, and this. Not healthy at all. So let me stop there for a moment here, Joe. So is this helpful, making sense? I mean, I don't want to get to a place where it becomes so convoluted that it becomes confusing. I'm trying to break it down to this very simple, practical essences of how to deal with this thing called compound shape. I'll just hold on for a moment here. Any comment at all? Much appreciate your input. Always do. So I think the idea of truth is something that it really has to be really specified, especially with young people. Just really getting into a lot of things. For example, the young people are spending a lot of money for an education, and they should be educated properly. So that really, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Definitely making sense. Good deal. So let's move along here. I'll come back into this guy. What I did here, just for what it's worth, came back in. There's another example of I put together a matrix or a building block series. It's just a little pen sketch here. I'm going to show you how to develop. Take this a little bit further, for example. Once you have this in line, now you come back to this. That's basically, here's my leading edge. This is where I started. I'll use this sketch to illustrate or show how to develop a compound form in a vehicle design, how to develop round shapes, and how to see it. What to learn how to see, and in your mind's eye, it's there as a construction tool. Then you begin to instructionally move it together to kind of finish the piece. So what we've got here is this. Here's my first shot at it. Here's my run here. Here's my basic, pardon me from over the pad here. Here's my basic perspective center. Now here's my major. Let's switch gears here for a moment. I'll keep it in red. Here's my major. And again, this becomes my minor. As I go back in space, I can come back in. Let's set this one up first. I can come back here. Here's my first one. And then this one, smaller, 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 and thinner. It kind of diminishes as you go back. So again, let's just kind of double check this guy here for a moment. There's my diagonal to find the perspective center. There's my perspective center. Here's my contact point, all four falling into place. There again, major axis, looking good. Just going to come back in and get this all set up here. Contact, 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 contact. Looking good. So there I am. Notice how, if you see it, start to see it here. Look how this guy, much fuller, wider, narrower as you go back in space. Now, here's a real good trick. In red, you'll notice here, I'm going to use that frame to set up a round organic shape. How to develop a round form in a transportation design piece. Same method. Now, notice what I've done. I've taken the width of this cube right here and added one more coming forward for this reason. I'm going to come back in and find my perspective center. Pardon me, again, as I move here, I'll use that upper plane and this upper plane to develop that surface. Find out where my perspective center is. There it is right there. That's my perspective center on that upper piece. Interesting. Now, I can use that as a point of reference. Now, here's my major, contact, contact, minor, pardon me, major axis going through, and there it is. Again, point to point. Now, that's going to tell me how to develop that round surface in the front of an automobile by doing the following. Let me just go back and review that again. I've taken that same cube, added one up front, came back up on top, and created the same face of a cube in two-point perspective on that top platform. And then from that, I found my perspective center, and then hit the contact point, the contact point, contact point, contact point. And it's no different than this guy right here. by just elaboration. Let me get myself all set up here. No different than that setup right there. Notice that same plane is being done. If I just turn these guys sideways, that's what I'm looking at, roughly. Does that make sense? Antares, so far so good? I'm going to take my time here because this gets a little more complicated geometry, but I'm seeing, when I draw an automobile or go through an illustration process, this is what I see. I see this stuff. I don't see the actual car. I see the actual formulation of the body of the shapes, all the geometry involved in it all. And once that's programmed, it's interesting. You can move it anywhere you want to in space, and it still remains the truth. It's still functionally accurate because you know where you are. You're not guessing at it. You always know where you are. So let me stop here for a moment. Help me out here, Antares. So far, so good. Helping? If you're still there, it'd be great to have your voice on board here. So I'm about to go ahead and show you how to develop a very round form in perspective, using the whole idea of these circles of perspective to make it all function properly. So here we go. What do you think? So far so good? All right, here we go. Now let's get this guy rotated. Let's get this guy in perspective here. Let's get that circle running into space here. There's my circle. There's my upper piece right here. Now that's interesting. Now notice this now becomes my reference point. I can come right down through here and do the same thing down below and pick up that same process here and watch how this guy opens up. Now I can connect those two pieces together right there. Now that's my upper plane. Just kind of hard line that in. There's one, and there's two. There's my upper form. Now let's say I want to put back in here and put a blister up in the shape over the wheels. There I am there. Let's run that across over the wheels. There I am. Say I want to drop that line down to about right here. So now I take that shape and come right into here after that and take that same circle and just rotate it by doing this. Let me do that in black. I've taken that same circle and now I've rotated it from orientation here to out over top with the top like this. Now I've dropped it. Contact point, come in, drop it down, bring it back up again, right in the fender. Look at that, how that all fell together. Does that make sense? See how we did that? Use the upper platform first, got the first circle in place, and dropped it from that station down to that station. Right. Now let's go back and do this. Let's come back around here and pick up the lower. Let's come back and pick up the center line. And then the upper. And there I am. Now look, hi Corey, how are you? Thank you for joining forces here today. Where are you from? Canada. No, it's just a Canadian flag here. Thank you so much for joining us. Is this helping? What do you think, Antares? Let me go back. I'm going to review this in a moment again because there's a lot of parts that are moving here that are really interesting how we see it all come together. Yep, absolutely. Projecting compound curves by taking, again, I notice right here, this is where I started, up on top. I've got that circle to work with. I took that point of reference right there, Antares, and dropped it down to right there. And I dropped that form. And what I've done here, in essence, if I could draw through this, I've taken that horizontal piece and just tipped the plane. I've done this with it now. I've opened it up and rotated and tipped it. Just dropped it down. Now I can come back in again. Notice, the reason I brought that into play here, now let's do this. So let's see if I can switch gears here. Let's put a headlamp graphic in here. Notice, once I put that headlamp graphic in place, look what happened here. I can't see it. All I see there is maybe just enough of, let's draw through it. Let's draw through it. I'll see just about that much of it right there. That's all I'm going to see. Look how very little I see of this, how much I see of that. Again, because of the distortion of shape. Isn't that cool how it all works? Up on top, rotated it, got it down to here. Now I can come back in again and use that same form, coming back underneath here. Let that disappear. And again, there's my hood line. There's my cowl. There's my basic body line, comes back in and picks up that area right here. There's my chute line coming through it. Let's go back and finish this up. Now let's go back into this. Axle, axle. Going inboard, outboard first. Again, axle, outboard first, inboard, again, outboard first, inboard, and again, very simple. Not a lot of fanciness there, but there you go, gang. There it is. How about that? Make sense, gang? Look how we took that whole concept here. Now, we could do this. We can start embellishing this stuff. We can start coming back in and embellish this stuff and do little arrow flares on this thing. See a little bit of it over there. Again, put a little bit of tone in this thing. And there it is. And there it is. What do you think, guys? I mean, I don't want to, but again, I really thought this would be a good demonstration about where we started, for example, coming into this stuff. This is where we started. That's how it all began. understanding how to put together the circles of geometry here. There it is. So there you go. All that information, all that training begins to tell you how to work with this stuff, and you've got it. I mean, I certainly don't want to overstate the fact here, but again, I use this sketch to illustrate how, in some cases, young people who are beginning to put together automobile design have a tendency to want to see that same light over here. It doesn't happen. The geometry proves that. Notice, I started with the circle up on top, extended, I went from that point to that point, extended the geometry, got the circle in place, dropped it from that station point down to that station point, and then dropped the whole circle. Now let me do this. I'm going to ruin my sketch, but here's how I started that. I just tipped that plane and went from that orientation to that orientation. By tipping it, that told me how much I've got to drop that form here. I can come back in, and just for what it's worth, now that I've got that, pardon me here, let's just kind of finish this off just a bit here. There it is. All right, so I just thought I'd use that as a tool to show you how that power drawing, yeah, it's almost what it's come back to that. It's true. The whole videotape I put together years ago called Introduction to Power Drawing. But again, I use this last sketch to illustrate how all of this information, for example, where was I here? All this information helps me to do that. I mean, that's what that tells me to do. Let me move this up just a bit. This information here, basic fundamental truth, tells the story. Same here, now it's a two-point perspective, that same process here. Look at the difference here. Let's just use for a moment here. Look at this guy and look at that guy. Look how they're standing upright. They're inside that envelope all together. It does not tip over, for example. It stands upright. And that's the whole idea, again, the idea behind circles of perspective. Number one, there are three things involved in it. Number one, let's get this out of the way for a moment here. Three things involved in it. Number one, there's a major axis. It's vertical. It shows you the orientation. It's standing upright. Secondly, minor axis. That tells me the direction. It's going, all the drive is going to my right-hand vanishing point. Lastly, orientation, the rotation system. That tells me how to spin that thing around that wheel. And I begin to put that into play here, and I can tell that story by coming back forward. And adding just a little bit of that to it. Same thing up on top back here. And there it is. I come back underneath it, and there's the actual product of all that geometry. Notice there's not a thing here, and I hope I can say this without any reservation at all. There's not a thing here that is out of order in terms of the geometry of truth. It's all truthful. It's all built on fundamental sound discipline. You can't debate the truth. And I think that was the reason behind the whole idea here. So let me just finish up by doing this. Same thing is true when you go to product design. There's some little thumbnail sketches. Same process. Notice axle, circle, axle, inclined plane. Again, grafting shape onto it. There's one element there. There's another set of elements there. Just very simple little thumbnail sketches. Again, breaking the orientation. If I were to draw through this thing, that starts right here. It does this. It goes to there. And then that whole process, that inclined plane, just moved. I just shifted the circle upright. It gave me the axis to get that form to put together. That's what it does. I mean, it's amazing how, for example, and I have said this before, and I hope it doesn't bore you to death. I've never, in my entire career, drawn cars. When I draw an automobile or product design or architecture, interior space, I don't draw the actual physical geometry. I draw the structure. I draw this stuff. All the structure, it's already embedded in my mind. And just taking advantage of that, hopefully that element as a building block for truth. I don't think I've ever had, honestly, I'm going to say this, and I don't want you to misunderstand the context. I've never used an underlay. I just go from start to sketch, go from light to dark. Always a bang, one truth on top of another, and before you know it, it begins to resolve itself. And you said it earlier too, and Terrace, and hopefully Cora, you're listening as well. You said it very well about maybe 20 minutes ago. It creates believability, not myth, not mistakes, but accuracy. It's accurate because our mind is activated by the truth found in the principles of perspective. Number one, circle in perspective, not an ellipse. 3 things involved in it. Face of a cube, that's how you work with it. First thing, major axis, always vertical in 1 point or 2 point perspective. Lays down, for example, 1 point perspective. It goes back to the vanishing point. Second element, minor axis, gives you direction. Third one, axle, gives you rotation. If you build on those truths and see those things come together and build those faces, there will never be a shape that you cannot literally begin to create. So I really appreciate the time here today, gang. Anybody, any closing comments, Corey or Antares, if you're still with me? Any closing comments? I hope this has been helpful for you. This will be a first of maybe several little thumbnail studies I'll start to do on basic transportation design. In this case, it's circles. I might do things like, for example, in volumetrics and the line weight studies. I'm just going to break it all down as best I can here and go through some refresher courses. Basically for myself, I always go through this whole process. It's always training ground here. So let me go out here for a moment. Please feel free to respond. I really appreciate your evaluation at the end of this thing. I'll wrap it up here. Anybody? Any commentary, please? Good to have you guys on board. Really helpful. Very helpful. Great questions, great feedback. And again, Corey, thank you for joining us in Canada. Super. I struggle with staying expressive and creative while keeping in mind all the accurate. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Antares. I mean, something you struggle with expressing or creating an idea while keeping in mind accurate construction. Here's a good little clue. If you understand the construction, do yourself a favor, cheat it. I just cheated the daylights out of this stuff too. I'm there because I understand it. Yeah, empathic sketches will help. But go back to your other question here about it. Something I struggle with is staying expressive and creative while keeping in mind all the accurate construction. Sometimes the construction will overpower the creative element. Let the construction become simple and the creation complex. And it comes down to learning how to cheat how to cheat a surface, how to create a certain thing that doesn't make, it doesn't look right, but it is right visually. I think Sid Mead made a comment once that I'll never forget, that distortion is one of the great products of great perspective. Think about that. Distortion is one of the great products of, no, I'm not. Corey, I am not awesome. I'm just a guy trying to put together pieces of things on the paper that make sense. So I appreciate the comment, but you guys are awesome for being part of the process. And once again, Corey, whereabouts are you located in Canada? You have a moment to respond here. But again, let's go back to that basic thought just a moment ago. Sid Mead was absolutely correct. Distortion is one of the byproducts of great perspective. You can learn how to cheat it. It goes back to your comment too, also, Antares. Staying expressive and creative while keeping in mind. Yeah, there you go. Keeping creative. You're struggling with staying expressive and creative while keeping in mind accurate construction. Be aware of the construction, but don't let it impede the creative process. Take the liberty to kind of go into distortion. Give it a try. Not to disfigure it, but to distort it. I mean, I extended things here, for example, extend the length, drop the height. These are all cheated areas, but they're actually parts of the construction process being so simple that allows the creation to be complex. So very good. Anybody? How about you, Corey? Any comment here in closing? Really great to have you guys on board, and thank you for the time. Very, very respectful. Thank you. So with that thought in mind, now that we're all wrapped up here today, I think next week I'll go back to maybe some basic fundamental sketch rendering stuff. I just thought today would be kind of a neat turn of events. Last week it was a corporate identity project that we were working on. Made the presentation. I'll have you some feedback on that hopefully next week. But I thought after last week going through that process, I thought for sure that and go back into just a fundamental truth and start to build a whole series of lesson plans, which I promised some time ago about putting together. So this is the first of many, hopefully. I'm going to keep them nice and quick and adroit and to the point. Comment, that makes sense. Allowing yourself to cheat and distort it. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an awful thing to say at this stage of the game, Antares, but that's what it comes down to. It makes sense allowing yourself to cheat and distort. And if you have to fudge a little bit and you have to change the light source a little bit, I do that all the time. I've got multiple light sources, but it comes from one source. So hopefully that makes sense for you. I practice that. Allow yourself to cheat a little bit and distort it and let the construction don't let the construction overwhelm you. Just be fundamentally sound in the construction, and then be just wide open in the creativity. So very good. Hey, Montcalm, city in New Brunswick. Wow. Montcalm, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, New Brunswick. Thank you very much, Corey, for tuning in. Dropping these amazing links. Well, it's my pleasure, and Terrace. And back to you, Corey. Thank you so much for joining us here on this stream today. Perspective from New Brunswick. Hope you join in next week on Wednesdays. I'm always live on Wednesdays from 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock on roughly, 2:30 thereabouts. So I hope we'll see you again next week. And Terrace, thank you very much for those very kind remarks. Very much appreciated. But again, I'm more excited about your progress being made here over the last few weeks since we've been together. So keep up the great work, Corey. All the best to you in Moncton, in New Brunswick. Just terrific to have you guys on board. Stay safe. Again, if you have a moment, please, Corey, visit my website at drcontrast.com. If you have any things that want me to work on, for example, Corey or Terrace, always drop me a note at jim@drcontrast.com. I'll be happy to help you and make it all work. It'd be just terrific to have you on board. And last but not least, I always say this in closing because I think it's absolute truth. No matter what you hear, no matter what you've heard today, no matter what we've gone through and putting the paper together here and putting sketches down, always remember this. Never forget to dare to remember to be great, because you are. All the best, gang. We'll see you next Wednesday. And let those circles ring out there and get those fundamentals down. And stay with it, and Terrace and Corey. Thank you again for joining me. Great day. See you next Wednesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.